You think silence means indifference. It doesn't. For an avoidant, silence is often where the feelings go, when they don't know what to do with them. Here's the part most people never tell you. If he truly didn't care, your absence would feel like relief. Not tension, not restlessness, not that quiet pull he can't explain. Avoidants don't stop loving easily. They stop expressing. They shut the door on emotion and then stand behind it, pretending they don't hear the knocking. The first sign he still loves you is not what he says. It's what he can't fully let go of. He may stop talking. He may stop reaching out, but he never fully disengages internally. His nervous system stays activated. That's why he checks your social media without interacting, why he watches but doesn't step forward, why your name still creates a reaction, even when he pretends it doesn't. Avoidants struggle with approach avoidance conflict. They want closeness, but closeness triggers fear. So their system does this strange thing. It pulls them toward you emotionally, then slams the brakes behaviorally. That's why his actions feel confusing, because inside him, two impulses are fighting: connection and self-protection. Love doesn't disappear. It gets buried under control. The second sign is that he resurfaces indirectly, not with clarity, not with accountability, but with low-risk contact, a reaction to a story, a vague check-in, a message that has no emotional weight. This isn't breadcrumbing by accident. It's a way to feel you, without risking vulnerability, to confirm you're still there, without having to show up fully. Avoidants don't ask, "Can I come closer?" They ask, "Is it safe to still be seen?" And safety, to them, means not being emotionally exposed. So they hover, they orbit, they test the emotional temperature, without stepping into the room. If he truly didn't love you, he wouldn't need to check. Indifference is clean. Avoidance is not. The third sign is internal regret that shows up late. Avoidants process emotions on delay, while you feel everything in real time. They suppress. They intellectualize. They convince themselves. Distance is maturity. But eventually, the emotional bill comes due. Usually when things calm down. When the pressure to respond is gone. When no one is asking them to explain. That's when memories surface. That's when they replay conversations. That's when they realize what they lost wasn't pressure. It was safety. But here's the most important distinction. Love does not equal readiness. Missing you does not mean he can choose you. Pain does not equal growth. And regret does not equal repair. This is where people get stuck. They mistake internal struggle for future change. They assume fear means depth. But fear only means fear. An avoidant can love you deeply and still be unable to meet you. That truth hurts, but it also liberates, because it stops you from chasing meaning inside someone else's nervous system. You stop trying to translate silence. You stop decoding mixed signals. You stop waiting for awareness to turn into action, and instead, you anchor into yourself. Because the real question isn't, does he love me? The real question is, can he love me well? And that answer is never found in words. It's found in consistency, presence, emotional availability, when it actually matters. If he still loves you, his system will feel unsettled. But unless he builds the capacity to stay, love alone won't create a relationship. And you don't need to sacrifice yourself to prove you were worth keeping. Your worth was never the issue. Capacity was. There's a moment most people never see. It happens quietly, internally. It's the moment when an avoidant realizes that losing you feels safer than risking being fully seen by you. Not because you're unsafe, but because intimacy is. This is the fourth sign. He still loves you, but is afraid to say it. He reframes closeness as a threat, not consciously, nervously. When things deepen, his system scans for danger, not emotional danger, identity danger, because closeness doesn't just ask for affection. It asks for presence, consistency, responsibility, and to an avoidant, those feel like traps. So instead of saying, I'm scared, he says, I don't think this is right. Instead of admitting fear, he reaches for logic. Logic sounds mature, but it's often just fear in a suit. He starts intellectualizing the relationship, analyzing compatibility, timing, circumstances, anything except the truth that he feels too much and doesn't know how to hold it. The fifth sign is emotional contradiction. He remembers details about you he claims don't matter. He reacts to your absence while insisting he's fine. He distances, yet becomes hyper-aware of who replaces him. Avoidants don't detach cleanly. They detach behaviorally, while remaining emotionally tethered. That's why they struggle. When you truly move on, not when you threaten to, when you actually do, that's when fear spikes. Because now the loss is real, not hypothetical. And hypothetical loss is manageable. Real loss is not. The sixth sign is control through silence. This one is subtle. He doesn't ignore you to punish you. He goes silent because silence gives him control over emotional exposure. If he speaks, he risks needing. If he needs, he risks dependence, and dependence terrifies him. So silence becomes his shield. But here's what people misunderstand. Silence doesn't mean absence of feeling. It means containment. He's holding everything in, so he doesn't have to face what closeness demands. The seventh sign is delayed emotional honesty. He opens up only when it's safe, after the relationship ends, after distance is established, after there's no expectation of follow-through. That's when avoidants suddenly say the things you needed to hear when they still mattered, not because they're cruel, but because honesty feels safer. When it no longer requires action, words are easy. When there's no risk of intimacy attached, this is where many people get pulled back in. They hear vulnerability and assume readiness. But vulnerability without consistency is just expression, not commitment, not change. The eighth sign is that he tracks your emotional availability. Even while pretending he doesn't care, he notices when you pull back, when your tone changes, when your energy shifts from invested to neutral. Avoidants are highly sensitive to emotional withdrawal because it signals loss of control. And control is how they stay regulated. When you stop chasing, explaining, or reassuring, his system feels exposed, not abandoned, exposed, because now he can't rely on your emotional presence to stabilize his distance. This is where the power dynamic flips, not through games, through self-containment. The ninth sign is internal conflict that looks like inconsistency. One day he's warm, the next he's gone. This isn't manipulation by design. It's dysregulation. Two parts of him are fighting for control. The part that wants connection and the part that wants safety. Safety usually wins, not because it's stronger, but because it's older, wired in early, deep, and until he consciously works on it, that pattern will repeat, no matter how much he feels. Which leads to the 10th and most important sign. He feels deeply, but he avoids responsibility for those feelings. Love without responsibility doesn't build relationships. It builds longing, fantasy, pain. And here's the grounding truth. That brings this full circle. If he truly loves you, but is afraid to say it, that fear will show up as distance, not devotion. And you don't heal fear by waiting quietly or loving harder. You heal it by refusing to abandon yourself. to accommodate it. Because the moment you stop centering what he feels and start centering what you experience, clarity replaces confusion. And clarity is where your power lives. Here's where most content stops at awareness. But awareness alone doesn't change the dynamic. Understanding that an avoidant still loves you, but is afraid, doesn't protect your nervous system. It doesn't stop the emotional whiplash, and it definitely doesn't build a secure bond. So this part is not about him anymore. It's about what actually shifts when love is present, but safety is missing. Because the truth is this: avoidants don't change when they feel loved, they change when the emotional structure around them changes. And that only happens when you stop compensating for their fear. The first shift is energetic, not behavioral. Most people try to do less while still feeling more. They stop texting, but keep waiting. They pull back, but stay hyper-focused on outcomes. Avoidants feel that. They don't respond to silence. They respond to emotional withdrawal. And emotional withdrawal is not coldness. It's neutrality. It's when your nervous system no longer orbits theirs. When you stop scanning for cues, stop interpreting tone, stop measuring your worth by how close or distant they feel today. That's the first crack in the avoidance control loop. Because as long as you are emotionally reactive, they remain emotionally dominant. The second shift is that you stop translating their behavior. This is subtle and extremely powerful. You stop saying things like, "He's just scared. He doesn't mean it. He's trying in his own way." Those explanations may be true, but when you internalize them, you erase your own experience. Avoidants rely on emotional ambiguity, not consciously, but functionally. Ambiguity allows them to stay connected without being accountable. When you stop interpreting and start observing, the fog lifts. You stop asking, "What does this mean?" and start asking, "How does this feel to live inside?" That question changes everything, because now the relationship has to justify itself emotionally, not intellectually. The third shift is that you stop rewarding partial presence. Avoidants often give intensity in bursts, moments of closeness, depth, affection, then distance. Those bursts keep you bonded. They create hope, but hope without consistency becomes self-betrayal. When you emotionally respond only to steady presence, the avoidant feels the loss of their old leverage. They can no longer dip in and out and still access you fully. This is where many avoidants panic internally, not because they're losing you, but because they're losing control over the emotional pacing. The fourth shift is that you remove yourself from the role of emotional regulator. Avoidants often unconsciously outsource regulation. Your reassurance calms them. Your availability stabilizes them. Your patience cushions their fear. But it costs you. You become the container for emotions they refuse to hold. When you stop doing that, their system has to feel what it's been avoiding. And that discomfort is necessary, not for punishment, for awareness. Growth doesn't happen while someone else is buffering the impact. The fifth shift is that you stop making love conditional on potential. This one is painful because you don't love who they are now. You love who they could be. If fear wasn't running the relationship, avoidants often sense this. They feel loved for their potential, not their presence. And paradoxically, that makes them feel inadequate, unworthy, trapped. When you start loving reality instead of possibility, you become grounded. And grounded people are impossible to manipulate with intermittent intimacy. Now, something important happens here. When these shifts are real, not strategic, one of two things occurs. Either the avoidant begins to feel the true cost of distance, and chooses to confront themselves, or they retreat permanently. Because your neutrality removes the fantasy of control. Both outcomes are wins. Because you stop living inside emotional suspense. And here's the part most people need to hear clearly. If he is deeply in love with you, but afraid to say it, your job is not to make him feel safer. It's to make yourself unavailable to unstable love. Fear does not resolve through reassurance. It resolves through boundaries that force internal reckoning. And boundaries aren't ultimatums. They're standards you live by quietly, consistently, without explanation. This is when the dynamic truly shifts. Because now, love without courage no longer has access to you. By the time you reach this stage, something fundamental has changed. You are no longer asking, does he love me? You're asking, does this dynamic honor me? And that single shift is what ends the cycle. Because the truth is this: love without safety does not become secure with time. It becomes exhausting. Avoidance don't stop being avoidant. Because someone proves their devotion, they stop when closeness no longer feels optional. And closeness only stops feeling optional when distance stops being rewarded. Now here's the part that most people misunderstand. When you finally pull back correctly, the avoidant doesn't suddenly feel free. They feel exposed. Why? Because the relationship has been operating on an unspoken agreement. You absorb the uncertainty. They avoid the vulnerability. When you step out of that role, the system collapses. And this is where the avoidant is forced to confront one of two realities. Either, I want this connection badly enough to face my fear, or I need distance more than I want intimacy. Both answers are clarity, and clarity is power. Let's talk about what this looks like in real life. When an avoidant still loves you, but senses that you're no longer chasing, no longer adjusting, no longer waiting, their behavior shifts in noticeable ways. Not dramatic, not cinematic, subtle, controlled, careful. They may start checking in more consistently, not emotionally, logistically, just seeing how you're doing. Random thought about you. This is not a confession. This is a temperature check. They are gauging whether the old access still exists. And here's the critical part: you don't shut them out. You don't confront. You don't open the emotional floodgates. You stay neutral, grounded, and contained. Warm, but not available. Present, but not inviting. This creates an unfamiliar sensation for them. Connection without control. That's uncomfortable for an avoidant. Because they don't fear love. They fear being needed and needing back. Now, if they are capable of growth, this is where effort begins. Not words, structure. They show up more regularly. They initiate without ambiguity. They begin to tolerate emotional exposure in small but consistent ways. That's the only sign that matters. Not longing, not missing you, not pain, capacity. And if that doesn't happen, if instead they fade, stall, or retreat further, then here is the hardest truth of all. They loved you in the only way their nervous system allowed. But love without capacity is not something you can build a life on. And here's where you reclaim yourself fully. You stop framing the story as almost love, almost ready, almost healed, almost keeps you emotionally suspended. You choose something radical instead: completion. You stop waiting for the version of them that may never arrive. And the moment you do that, something remarkable happens. Your nervous system stabilizes. The obsessive thoughts quiet. The urge to interpret every signal disappears. Because you're no longer negotiating your worth against someone else's fear. This is the point where people say, you became cold. You didn't. You became sovereign. You learned that real love does not require self erasure, that emotional safety is not something you earn by being patient enough, and that someone being afraid to say they love you is not a romantic obstacle. It's information. So let this be the final truth you carry forward. If he loves you and cannot move toward you, his love is incomplete. An incomplete love does not get access to your life. Not because you're angry, not because you're punishing, but because you finally understand. That peace is not something you sacrifice. For potential, you don't chase certainty, you embody it. And the moment you do, everything aligns, either with them stepping forward or with you stepping free. Both are endings. Only one is loss, and it's not yours. If this spoke to you, comment the word sovereign. Not for me, for yourself. Because the moment you stop chasing clarity from people who can't offer it, everything changes.